Okay, welcome everyone. Hey, Kos, you're here. Oh, you're muted.
I said, sorry, I've like overbooked my life since I've been gone for so long. I'm like hustling clients in and outdoors.
Yeah. Glad you're here. All right, so Natalie is our faculty athletic rep. Natalie's got, why don't you take it away? Why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I just wanted to start by acknowledging kind of what happened early this week in Georgia, and just the hate that we've seen, not only in Georgia, but everywhere, and even here on campus. And I want to stress to students, especially, that we're all here for you, like faculty, staff, admin, like, please come to us if there's anything we can do. I know it's a hard time for many. I mean, and the Asian community is our community. Like, we're all the same community, and we need to really take care of one another. And if incidents are happening on campus, please report them to gosh, totally blanking on student affairs and to kind of security, because those need to be taken care of. And we are working on, I just met with the president, and we are working on more cameras around campus to handle some of the stuff that maybe has been happening recently. But yeah, I again just want to stress that our heart goes out to all of our students and all of our community, our staff, our faculty, that I know it's been heavy on a lot of us this week. And it's hard sometimes to just unplug and try to plug away and not think about those things. But I want you to encourage you to not only think about them, but also talk about them with us, and let us know how we can help in any way. But yeah, that was about it. And thank you for our guests too. I'm really excited for this conversation, and I think this will be great.
Me too. Thank you. Yeah. All right, so welcome to Linfield's WildXchange, which stands for Weekly Insight, Listening, and Dialogue Across Campus. And this has started as a conversation about race and social justice. And we've tried to sort of stay connected to that, or bring some element of that into every conversation. But we also are trying to offer a really broad range of topics, because this is a great window of time for people to meet Friday at lunchtime, right? To get together and kind of talk about all sorts of things. So today I'm really excited to do a brief introduction, and then I'll hand it off to Maddie. This was a SAC organized event, this WildXchange. Primarily shout out to Bethany Shade for putting this together. Thank you, Bethany. But we are really excited to have three experts here who not only were phenomenal athletes in their own right, but then also have gone on to become outstanding counselors and resources and mentors to the people around them. So we've got our former Wildcat, Lindsay Kandra, ran track here at Linfield, went on to become an all-star, just phenomenal athlete. I met her probably 10 years ago when she was training for Ironman triathlons. Also has competed in cyclocross, is a retired lawyer and converted to being a mental health counselor, and is doing a fantastic job at that. We've loved having her doing our monthly workshops for all athletes. So thanks for being here, Lindsay. We also have Coach Kos, Kerry Farrell. I mean, I never call you Kerry Farrell, and so it just looks so funny to see Kerry Farrell on your Zoom. But Coach Kerry Kosderka, former D1 softball player and softball coach at Concordia University, D2 national champion coach, and phenomenal person around campus. When I worked with her there at Concordia, just knew everybody, knew everything that was happening. If you needed help from anyone, you'd go to Kos. She's that person on campus. So glad to have her here. She's got her degree in mental health counseling and has been just an outstanding resource for all the athletes and parents of athletes around her. She also hosts the Training the Complete Athlete podcast. So if you haven't tuned into that, check that out wherever you get your podcasts. And then we have Chris Edwards. Chris Edwards was a basketball player at Concordia, also has played overseas in Germany, I believe, right? And currently is getting his master's in counseling. And Chris, where are you enrolled at school again? If it was at Western?
The University of Western States.
That's right. Okay, yeah. So very excited to have you here as well. And Chris is somebody that for me personally, I just met him last week, and I will say, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, COVID time, I don't remember. But we had a conversation with Chris where he just dropped some gems in that conversation. I used them in my conversations with athletes that very afternoon. And I'm so appreciative for all three of you bringing your perspective and your experience as athletes, as people who have dealt with the mental aspect of being an athlete. And then I've also gone into this line of work of helping others with that. So thank you for being here. With that, I'll hand it over to our rock star, Maddie, who's going to moderate this conversation. Take it away, Maddie.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Jane was saying. Thank you all for being here. We're very excited, and huge shout out to Bethany. Like Jane said, she was really the star on putting this all together. So we're very excited. Just for a premise, this conversation is just kind of focused around how to stay motivated in the face of uncertainty, which we've all faced this year, whether you're an athlete or not. And we've all faced throughout our lives, whether it's in COVID or not. So we have some questions for you all, just kind of getting your own personal experience as an athlete, then also your how that has related to your career as a mental health professional. But also if anyone has questions throughout, go ahead and put them in the chat. Unmute yourself, talk, go ahead. And yeah, so with that, first question, what were some adversities that you faced in your athletic career that you had to show resilience to work through and overcome?
So do we just jump in or
Yeah, go ahead.
So I actually retired early. I mean, I had injuries throughout college, nothing like life-changing. But my sophomore year, I had dove for a ball, just thought it was a typical athletic-related injury. Knew I was going to, spend a lot of time in the training room. It ended up after a year of seeing doctors and surgeons and treatments, I ended up having a spinal fusion at the age of 20 years old. And they put me in this brace that I looked like a stormtrooper. Like somebody actually asked me where the rest of my costume was when I was out shopping one time. And I did all my rehab. I was super diligent because for me, softball was like the only thing I really cared about doing. And I was returning to play, and I looked at my college roommate, and she had been through a bunch of surgeries. And I said, Monson, something's wrong. She's like, no. This is just life getting back to playing. And I said, yeah, I don't think so. So I had called my doctor. We had done another CT scan, and my fusion did not work. So I had 2 spinal fusions in 9 months. And I, rehabbed, did all those things. I ended up the end of my senior year, I still was having trouble, going to class, doing the regular function, and I retired from playing softball at that point in time. I went on to coach. I pretty much was an undergrad assistant and stayed on at Utah for 2 years. But I chased doctors all over the country, Texas, Seattle. Nobody could really figure out why my fusions weren't working. My pool therapist was like in my social media, like we're like buds still, 20 years later. And I've actually struggled with chronic pain from all this since I was 19. And so part of my practice is working with athletes, but even more of a niche is I work with injured athletes or chronic pain kiddos, because injured athlete or chronic pain pretty much matches athlete. It's pretty much one and the same. And I think for me, I was always training, not knowing if I was ever going to play again. So for me, it was kind of like my own mini COVID of like every day you go to physical therapy or every day you decide to get up and go to workouts. It was, hopefully this will pan out. And so, when I look back at it, was always my training. Most of my college career was always kind of like COVID training.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Okay. So my experience is just a little different, like chronologically. I retired from track and field at Linfield due to some chronic injury issues, but that wasn't really, it wasn't the end of anything. I graduated, I went to law school and got really into, as Jane said, doing triathlon work and coaching and doing that competition. Decided I hated running longer than 800 meters, quit doing triathlon and got into cycling pretty heavy when I was probably about 29 years old. raced at the national level in cyclocross. And right in the beginning of 2010, I was at a place where my goal for 2010 in road racing was actually to qualify as an amateur for some professional level events. Like I was getting that good. And about 1 week into my season, I got diagnosed with stage 2B breast cancer. So at 32, found out that my left boob was trying to kill me and had to spend like 6 months dealing with surgeries, chemotherapy, radiation. I had some chronic nerve pain already from surgeries. And then, so that was probably the most major setback, was from going from like, I literally won a race on Sunday and was diagnosed with cancer on a Wednesday. So everything kind of comes to a screeching halt, like your body's trying to kill you. I have always dealt with my own mental health. I've struggled with depression and anxiety since I was in my teens by moving. That was my thing. Like I moved hard and I did this thing and all of a sudden couldn't move. And really, really struggled with anxiety and kind of existential crisis all through kind of the treatment. And then coming back out of that, just like I had a changed body and like I changed, that was the negative part of my body was changed. I have some chronic gastrointestinal stuff now because don't do chemo unless you have to, because it really F's up your gastrointestinal tract. And I also just had on the positive side, like I didn't care as much about some of this stuff anymore. Once your body tries to kill you, I think nobody should ever have an experience like that, but I cared less about the winning and stuff. So there's kind of like you have these crises and there's the bad part of them. But for all of you in mental health, there's also something called post-traumatic growth, right? There's this bad stuff that happens that can really just weigh you down. But there's also a whole bunch of growth that happens. And so I'm 11 years cancer-free as of last month. And it's been, thank you, this journey of just like, I have, for a lot of us, having to stop doing what we're doing, whether it's for mental health issues or whether it's for injury issues, are these like pivot points in our lives. And I also really enjoy working with athletes to try to help them understand like these can be pivot points. And we're all so resilient. Like we do hard things all the time. So our nervous systems are set up to deal with these hard things. We can do hard things. It's just a matter of like reframing how we're gonna like move forward with our life.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so mine, it would be my senior year at Concordia. Won our first 4 games and we were getting votes to be nationally ranked. And then we lost 21 straight. And I don't know if you guys know what it's like to lose from November to February, but let me tell you, it's not fun. It was so hard, especially because my best friends at the time were soccer girls and they had just gone to the national tournament, won conference, like they were living large, and I'm over here collecting so many L's. Yeah, it was hard. So I think for me, when you lose that many games, it's very easy just to give up and not go to practice and not want to play in the games. And so it was just, for me, I had to find that extrinsic motivation wasn't there. I had to dig deep with myself to like, why am I still playing this game? Like, even if we're losing. And that was probably the hardest journey, apart from like everything else that was going on my senior year. On top of that, I had been losing 21 games. So I think just learning how to hold on and like attach myself to my why, like why I play the sport, why I got to this level, had really got me through. And the simple fact was I just had fun and I was good. And just having fun and like letting basketball be an escape was the way for me to keep going, regardless of like what the scoreboard said or what our record was. I still was having fun at practice because I could see myself getting better. I still was having fun in the games, even though we were losing. But I know I was playing well and I was challenging myself to do better. And I started competing against myself versus like the opponent. And that really just taught me how to just keep going no matter what holds you back. And like, losing isn't the end, and your identity isn't just in the sport, but it's in so much more. And how you handle yourself during those times really makes a difference, and people can see like the effort that you have. Like it's easy, like everyone can see who gave up. Like you can see when a player gives up, and then you can see a player who's like grinding and giving it their all every single game, no matter what. And that's just the kind of person I wanted to be. So I really had to make the decision probably about 10 losses in, like, am I going to give up or am I going to keep pushing and keep fighting? And unfortunately, because basketball is a team sport, it doesn't matter how well I play. If no one else plays well, then we're still going to lose. And that's also just a hard aspect, because I was nationally ranked in 3 categories: double doubles, field goal percentage, and then offensive rebounds. So like, it was there. I was doing all the right things. I had All American numbers, but no one wants an All American if you lose 22 games in the season, and that's just the fact of the matter. And even that was just difficult for me too. It's like, man, I'm better than so many of these other cats, but it's like, it doesn't matter because my team's not winning. So that was just a huge ego check of like, you can be as good as you want on a team sport, but if your team is not winning, then they don't care, which is true. Like, you go as far as your team goes. And as a leader, I had to learn to put that aside. Like, I don't care what my stats are. If my team's not winning, then I'm not doing my job. And so it was a lot of battle, a lot of mental warfare. Is like, quitting but keep going, don't go, lose this game but play great, play bad and still lose the game. Like, it doesn't matter how I played, the result was still the same.
Thank you all for sharing. Those are all really great stories that I think the athletes in here and the non-athletes in here, retired athletes, can like identify with and take something from. And kind of going off of that, how did you all, in the face of those adversities, Chris, you kind of touched on this, but like, you found the way to stay motivated and to find confidence in your team, especially in a team sport, to kind of pull that all together in that face of adversity? Like, how would you, or what advice would you give to us to deal with that kind of adversity?
I think I handled things for myself in one way. You know, I'm old, I'm getting old. So counseling was not a thing. Like, athletes didn't go to counselors. And we had one of the best sports psychologists in the country. He worked with the U.S. Olympic team for track. And I walked into his office, and he's this like larger than life personality guy. And I go, hey, I think I'm depressed. And he looks at me and he goes, yeah, I don't do depression. And I go, then what do you do? And he's like, well, performance. And it's funny because that has altered my view on sports psychology for the rest of my life. Because everybody's like, you're a sports psychologist. I'm like, no, I am not. So I almost get defensive about it. But so I was like, well, great. Now where do I go? I'm an athlete. My sports psychologist can't help me. Like, I think this is depression. I don't really know what to do. And so I went to our team doc, and she had been with me through all my surgeries and all these things. And I remember sitting, waiting for her to come into the exam room. And there was a poster, and there used to be a drug commercial that had this little ball, and it looked sad. And it was like, are you sad? Are you depressed? And I remember seeing her for the first time thinking, I'll never be any of those things. And then 2 years later, I was looking at the little ball advertisement going, oh my gosh, I'm the ball. You know, I had become the thing I said I would never become. And I said to my team doc, I go, I think I'm depressed. And she started laughing. And I was like, okay, I have a sports psychologist that told me he can't help me, and I have a doctor laughing at me. And I just looked at her. She goes, I'm surprised it took you this long. And she goes, it's been 2 years of awful. And she's like, yes, we need to do something about this. And so at that point, she's like, well, we can do medication, but you have to see a counselor. And I was like, fine, whatever. And to be honest, I went to my school counselor, the counselor on campus had no idea about athletics at all. It was not a good fit. And so I thought, okay, I have to do this again. But I went back to my doctor, and she goes, hey, I have this person. And I went and met him, and he was the perfect fit. He was a Utah alum. He was an injured athlete. Like, he was the absolute best. I literally think now, I'm like, maybe if I just fly to Salt Lake once in a while, I'll just, do a session, 20 years later. But the thing with him is he understood sport. He understood what it was like to lose your career and all the things that went along with it. And the thing for me that I've learned with working with athletes is athletes speak a different language. We live a very different life. It's a very different culture. And it's really important to sit across from somebody that gets that culture. I've had people that have gone to several counselors, and then I'm like their last one. And I'm always like, so who made you come? And they're like, my mom, my girlfriend, my whatever. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to make you lay on the couch and ask you how that makes you feel. Like, we're going to get after it. And so I think as mental health for me, I was so grateful to have somebody that got what it was like to be a high level athlete, because it's a different world, right? As far as my team, I was a team captain. So I'm a team captain trying to lead from literally, I couldn't sit down after my first surgery because I was in this big brace. I would be in a lounge chair, literally in the stands. When I think about it, it's so ridiculous. But that was the only way I could be back with my team. And I'm a team captain trying to be a leader in that position. But I had to just be something different to my teammates. Like, I wasn't the starting second baseman anymore. And so for me, I had to kind of play the social director. And Jane will tell you, I'm always the social director. Like, that's kind of my role. And so we had some crazy drama going on my junior year, but we had an insanely talented team. So my role was to manage everybody else's drama to make sure that we could perform at the utmost level. We actually were one game away from the World Series that year, but I just became who I was as a person became more important than who I was as a player. Right. And I also always wanted to be a coach from that point. So I spent every minute I could learning as much about the game. My coach was really awesome about letting me talk about lineups and why she was doing what she was doing. And I also look at it as it's prepared me now for what I do now. Like, I went on to be a coach. And even now that I'm a counselor that works with chronic pain kids and injured kids, I would say I took the 20 years of me going through this now that I get to shorten the journey for so many other people. A lot of kids, my clients will say, man, I've been at this for like 4 years. And I'm like, dude, it's been 20, but I want you to not go through 20 years. Right. So there have been days that I'm like, man, what a scam. Like, didn't finish my career. Never found out if I could have been, bigger than I, won awards and all that stuff. But I also think that all the experiences that happened in my time at Utah, and even my medical journey through Concordia and becoming an assistant AD at Concordia, all of those things led to where I'm at now, which I definitely think is way bigger than me playing softball for 4 years. Not saying being a collegiate athlete is not like the greatest thing, because if my body was healthy, I'd still be doing it. But there are such huge things that we can take from all these horrible situations or adverse situations and take out into the bigger world. Like, it's funny listening to Chris, because I was a coach when he was there and seeing what he's done with his stuff. So it's been interesting to watch this all play out and what he's doing with it now. And I think that's why I feel sometimes like a proud mom of, this 6'7" kid, because I've seen the adversity and what he's chosen to do with it. And a lot of people melt and they just say whatever. And that's like, even Chris and I had a conversation at the beginning of COVID when he came back from Germany. And Chris, you may remember this or not. And I go, so what are you going to do with your COVID time? He's like, well, I'm going to go back to school and do this and this and this. Most people were not saying that. And I was like, we've all wanted life to slow down, right? We all say life goes too fast, it's too busy. And I always wanted to say, so we got that time, what were we going to do with it? Right. And some people have rocked COVID. Some people have played a lot of video games and got really good at Fortnite. Right. For me, I looked at it, was like, this is how I'm going to use this time to build a podcast to help, the population that I've been wanting to help for so long. And finally, I have the time to do so. Right. So once again, like, life stops sometimes. And sometimes we get really upset when life stops, but we have to figure out what we can use that time to either move along in our careers or benefit all the people that are surrounding us at the time. So I think for me, that was always what I focused on, was like, I couldn't play again. So what was I going to do with my time to better the people around me?
I can go, Chris. Okay. So my experience of this is a little different because I've always excelled in individual sports. And so kind of the thing that the emotional transition that happens is, I think, maybe a little bit different, just because you're already isolated and then you become more isolated, especially if you've been removed from your communities. And we talk about this thing in mental health all the time called reframing. And I think times like this are the places that it's ideal to reframe. So I can't compete. Like I can't do this thing that I have set out to do. What can I do at the time? And Kaz mentioned this a little bit about when she was talking, was like, what do we do with this time? And something that I remember that got me through it is, as an athlete, as somebody who was really struggling with like sitting still and not being able to compete, is I started experimenting with just moving my body in different ways. And it seems really basic, but we're all here conditioned to move our bodies. And I had been really stuck in this endurance sports cycle since I was in high school, and I couldn't do that stuff for a while. My system couldn't handle it. And so I started doing things. I started rock climbing, and I started practicing yoga, and I started doing all of these other things, hiking, backpacking, that I'd been putting aside because all I wanted to do was race bikes. My identity was tied up in racing bikes. My social system was tied up in racing bikes. Couldn't do that shit anymore. So, but I realized if I sat still, I was going to melt. Like I was going to turn into myself. Like I was a miserable person for quite a while, and miserable to other people, quite honestly. Like you could probably ask whoever I was dating at the time. I was probably a fairly miserable person to date at that time. But what we can do as athletes is, like, this could be a time where we start working on trying other things, trying individual sports. Also, if you want to keep it in the world of, you know, your sport, I don't know about y'all, probably things have advanced in the last 20 years, because that dates me for when I did college sports. I don't remember spending as much time on things like flexibility and functional range conditioning, mobility stuff. And that stuff was really put on the backside. It was all intervals, straightforward, doing the time. Maybe we stretched. There was some stuff in the weight room, but I was middle distance, so you weren't really supposed to do that. But this is the time where you can actually start improving yourself in your sport and these kind of 3 and 4 dimension stuff. Doing some of this mental, like managing your mental health, working on the sports psychology stuff. Like, I think that is how it got me through it, is I just kind of gave in and listened to my body, continued moving, but learned how to, I had this space and time to learn how to move my body in a different way. And what that ended up doing was opened up a whole bunch of opportunities for growth. Like, I've done some really cool things rock climbing. I'm a yoga teacher now. I still ride all the time, but my identity isn't fixed with it. And I think sometimes this space that we have, like this last year, we're all still going to be athletes, right? We can create other parts of our identity, whether you're doing it in your early 20s, you did it like I waited to my mid 30s to get around to doing it. It's space and it's rest to kind of be different, and it's safe to be different, because everybody's in the same space where we're all exploring this thing. So it doesn't seem so weird to step out of just that one role.
Yeah, I would say going back to what I touched on earlier is finding your why. And that is, like, I think for me that was super important, because we like to, like, as athletes, like to anchor ourselves on statistics or records or like your teammates, and you know, all of those are fleeting. They come and go, and they often disappoint. But figuring out why you do the thing you did and why you started your sport has always been important for me, because it was like I played basketball because I loved it. Like, it was, for me, I just would go outside and play no matter what was going on. Like, I'm a kid from SoCal, so like even if it was raining, I was still outside playing basketball, and like rain is foreign to us. But we're like, yeah, just finding that why, and like, why do I play sports? One, because I'd wake up every day, my body hurting, like knees hurt, head hurts, back hurt, everything's just in pain, and I'm like walking to class struggling. But then I just love the rush. I love being able just to challenge myself and do something new. And like all of that reason was enough for me to push myself to keep going. And so, like, for any athlete that I meet with and I talk with, it's even coaches too. It's like, okay, you're struggling. Why? Why are you here? What got you into coaching? Why do you do what you do? And everyone usually stumbles because no one really thinks about the why often. But when you sit down and think about it, it re-energizes you. Something happens in your brain. You just go like, oh, this is why I started. Like, this is why I love it. It's a passion of mine because of this. But I got so caught up in winning and losing, or being the best player, being the best team, or whatever it was. We get so caught up in that, and we just forget, like, as a child, this is why we started playing the sport, because of these reasons. It wasn't because of winning or losing. We didn't have that concept. We didn't care back then. All we cared about was having fun in a social circle, if you're like in a team sport, or having fun like in nature if you're doing like hiking, rock climbing, cycling, whatever. And so just the why for me is what always got me through adversity.
I'll chime in on this because this is one of the things, Chris, that you said the other day that I was just like, this is just fantastic what you were talking about. I think Bethany asked you a question about how do you stay motivated when you know you need to stay in shape for your sport? And you said, well, do you need to or do you desire to? And just that, like reframing, again, back to what Lindsay's saying, like just switches your whole perspective on everything. And that's like, while we're in this adverse time, that's a key thing, the connecting to your why and asking what do you desire out of this?
Oops, could I comment a couple of things? Kos mentioned that we're getting older and started thinking about being older and being a former athlete myself, and it triggered some things, you know, and I've had people ask me, was it worth it? Now here's Chris saying why in the moment, but there's also why in the past. Would you do it again? Put your body through all of that training and the commitment and the time. You know, I'm older, my knees hurt, you know, my elbows hurt, you know, you're kind of dealing with trying to be functional as an older former athlete. And my answer was, yes, I'd do it all over again. Absolutely. Because you enjoyed doing it and you knew why you did it. Really helps. But it is getting older hurt. It sucks. So.
You know, it's interesting because I get asked that question a lot. My mom still asks me that, you know, and it's been 20 years since I went through all my stuff. And as I say, still dealing with all my stuff. And I said, yes, I would do it all over again. And it's interesting because I'm the youngest of 3 children. My brother played at Willamette, I'm sorry, and now he coaches at Lewis and Clark, and I'm really sorry for that as well. But you know, so we definitely, I hate to say it, I had some preconditioned thoughts about Linfield before, so all based on him. But he and I were these, and he played through the minors, right? So he and I played at some of the highest levels you can play. My sister played 7th grade basketball, and that was like it, right? And I watch us as we develop and how different the 3 of us are. Yes, that's genetics and all those things. But I look at some of the things my sister struggles with, and I don't, and I base that so much on sports, right? Because in the world of sports, you are challenged in ways that you are not challenged in regular life. You are challenged to look at other people's needs and how you function in a group. I mean, when you look at the game of softball, it's stupid, right? Like at least basketball makes sense. You know, soccer makes sense, but softball's kind of a ridiculous sport. You hit a ball and run around some bases. But it's the lessons that you gain that truly make you better at being a spouse, a parent, a friend, a business owner, a coworker, that all of the things that I've taken into my life, my career, my relationships has made all the physical pain and all the grind worth it. Like, I think, why did I coach college so long? Like, that's a grind, you know, but all the relationships, all the things I've learned, all the experiences, because I used to always say that as a coach, you're never going to remember when you committed errors or you struck out. And trust me, we all made a lot of mistakes as an athlete. We remember the random conversations that you have with your teammates in hotel rooms, or the crazy car rides, or the hard lessons that you learn. Those are the things you take with you. So even if COVID has put your career on pause, or it's deleted years, that's not what you're going to take away with you that is going to bring so much value into life after sport. You know, the hard thing too is, as I say, is the identity piece, right? We do wrap ourselves around in athletics. In so many ways, this has given us an opportunity to look outside of that as well. But I think that the gifts that athletics brings to us in creating our character and our life skill set is so much bigger than winning championships, right? You know, I watch the World Series every year, and to be honest, my team wins a lot because I'm a big Oklahoma fan, and I'm always watch them and go, oh, I'm so excited they won a national championship. And my coaching brain goes, oh man, they're going to enjoy that for 24 hours and then they got to go recruiting. That's my thought, is they get to enjoy it. And as a coach, they start recruiting within 48 hours. But the thing is, that trophy only means so much. It's the pile up with all the people and the things that have come into play to get to that trophy that really make it all worth it. Right. And I think with COVID putting sports on pause, we all think that, well, we aren't chasing trophies anymore. But really, that's such a small sliver of why we do sports.
You guys just like took everything that I had a question about. So no, we have more, but that was all just awesome. And I think kind of comforting in a sense to, I don't know, athlete, like I have a week and a half left of playing soccer, and it's kind of comforting in the fact that obviously I know that I play for a lot more than the wins and the championships, and just kind of seeing that we get to like reframe it and kind of take what the best of what sports gives us, and that like can't be taken away from us, it's very comforting in a time like this. So thank you for all of your insight on that. Kind of switching gears, you all were talking about the great moments that you take away are with your teammates, or they're not necessarily tied to wins or losses. So how do you build those relationships, and how do you maintain those relationships? I think especially like in COVID, we've had a hard time, and kind of almost not use it as an excuse, but just, we can't do the typical team bonding types of activities and stuff like that and build those relationships in the typical ways that we would. So what advice would you have for us to build relationships, and why those are so important in sport and in mental health, regarding your mental health in sport?
I think that athletes, especially team-based athletes right now, have a really unique opportunity to kind of, I'm going to go so Brene Brown here, but like get vulnerable, because we're like our relationships in team sports. I played basketball for a really long time too at a high level, and you're allowed to be a little superficial, right? Because it's about what's on the court, and then everything kind of stays on the court, and you've got this language that you're talking to each other in, and now we're isolated and we don't see each other. And in order to keep connections and bonds with each other, you actually have to be vulnerable and make efforts. And so it is a unique opportunity to like kind of move beyond the superficial stuff. And I know like I did a workshop for Maddie's team on Monday? God, this time is like not existent right now. On Monday, talking about how you support your teammates. And they were all there just like listening to me jabber on about like supporting people and stigma, and then inviting people to talk about that stuff. Because I think that if you guys can get, like teams can get beyond the superficial stuff, the X's and O's and the slaps on the butt and all that stuff, to actually talk about like, how do we support each other as adults? How do we become leaders? How are you actually feeling today? And creating like those environments, like kind of building adult skills, I guess. You guys actually like I'm a huge reframer, obviously, but you're in a place right now where you can come out with stronger leadership skills and stronger bonds than you started with, because you're going to be forced to be vulnerable and open with people, or everything just stops.
I'm a compulsive checker inner. So if I'm standing still, which is not very often, as soon as somebody even comes into my brain, I text them immediately. So people get really random texts from me at all really random times, and they just know that about me. And a lot of it's my teammates, or I'll send funny videos that are a reminder. There was a thing called Mad TV. It was like kind of a sketch thing back in the day. And there was a thing that my team always watched like compulsively. As soon as we got to the hotels on road trips, we'd turn on Mad TV. 20 years later, I'm still getting clips from that from teammates. We always get into a group chat during the World Series. But even today, I see alums' birthdays, and I want to still be living life with them. My alumni are some of my most blessed relationships have come from a lot of my alumni, which I was lucky. I was a 24-year-old head coach, so a lot of my alumni are similar ages to me. But when I was going through coaching and playing, that relationship was the biggest takeaway, right? And I'm probably going to be unpolitically correct, so I apologize for that if any of this comes out unpolitically correct. But like going to school in Utah, there was two types of people: Utah people, which half my team was, which is a very different culture, to non-Utah people, right? And so it was interesting making relationships with people that were very different than people from outside of the state of Utah. And I remember staying with a roommate, and I was very boring in a big time, like square, never drank, never swore, never did anything. And I got one of my teammates that was my roommate was the complete opposite of me. And we had the best weekend probably of my whole collegiate life rooming together, because we were okay. We wanted to really know who each other was. It wasn't about like, oh, you're my teammate. It was like, okay, you come from a whole different part of the world than I do, and I want to know about that, and vice versa. And we literally walked out laughing, going, can you believe that the two of us just had like the best weekend ever? But it was a time that we truly got to deeply know each other, like that vulnerable state of, who are you really, right? And that's the thing is to be at our utmost performance. How do you play next to somebody that you don't genuinely know? Everybody says you don't have to be friends, you don't have to be friends off the field, and you can play well on the field. I don't agree with that whatsoever. Because how do I trust the person next to me if I don't even know them, right? And I also look at it as everybody comes from a whole different experience. I joke that one of my coaching staffs, we had so much in common, but our root experience was very different, right? So you can't say that every race's experience is different, every gender's experience is different, every human being's experience is different. And we need to be able to reach out and connect with those people to figure out what their experience was, to be able to connect with them. And I know for me, my teammates are still some of the most valuable people, because I would give anybody a kidney if I played with them, And so for me, that has been the probably the best takeaway, is the relationships that were part of it, part of our team. And my biggest regret is I competed against a second baseman, and we were not really that friendly, because it was always the competition. We didn't become friends until I retired. And I look at it as that was 2 years that I could have been friends with a really great person, but our competitiveness got in the way. So, COVID actually kind of takes some of that competitiveness away. So it allows an opportunity for us to get to know people as people instead of, you want my spot. Because lots of times that gives us skewed views of who our teammates really are.
Yeah, I'd hop on and say, practically right now, some of the ways that I've been close with my teammates from Concordia, we play fantasy football every year, and we've been doing it for the past 4 or 5 years. And so like even when I was in Germany, we would still play together. So we have a group chat, and we just like, hey, fantasy football's up again. Let's do the draft. And like we meet every year for they were doing in-person drafts. Obviously I wasn't there, so I would hop on through like a FaceTime or something, because Zoom wasn't that big. Or like I play board games online with a lot of people, and I know people get tired of looking at screens, but it's just different when you play board games. I love it. I think it's a lot of fun, and that's one of those things where you definitely become vulnerable in like these moments, because I play a lot of like social deduction games, so it's like I'm gonna lie to you, and you're gonna have to figure out whether you can trust me or not. And like it's great because that's when people start to they can know my tells. And I think when it's one of those unspoken, nonverbal things where it's like, okay, I know your tell now. And so like if I were to check in on you, I'm like, okay, something's up. And because we played this game together, I know that something's up because I get your tells. So that has really just drawn me closer. Like my young adult group back in California, we meet every Tuesday, and pretty much all summer we were just playing board games that were like, we were just lying to each other all summer. But I never been so close to people in my life. Like they're some of my closest friends. They know so much about me because in between games we just start talking, and like just life comes out. We're vulnerable without even thinking that we're being vulnerable. And so just being able to do something in a way that's like just break down the walls, not think about sports, not think about anything, but like let's just do life together. It's just a way for us to just to be. And to be vulnerable or to have fun and like not think. And for me coming up here, I'm Black. It's very obvious that I am, and Portland is very not, and Concordia was very less than that. And so that was just hard for me to come on, and like there's maybe 15 Black people on campus, and 4 of them are on the basketball team, and so it's like these aren't my people. And Portland is just different than like the LA area where I grew up. Like it is. And so it was hard to try to fit in. And I think joining FCA, which is what now who I work for, and all of that has helped me. And a lot of it was like, hey, we're not going to talk about sports, but we're just going to talk about like what's on your heart. How's your heart posture today? Like, are you good? But like, actually tell me if you're good or not, because we won't go anywhere unless we're being vulnerable, or we're just going to be stagnant. And whether someone opened, like, you just need one person to open that door. And Kaz knows that I'm one of those people who will open that door, and with reckless abandon, because that's for me. It's like, hey guys, like, I'm not feeling good today. Like, I'm scared out of my mind, and then just like just open up and just be able just to talk, because everyone goes like, hey, how are you? I'm fine, thanks, and then dip. But like Lindsay said, like, how's your heart doing? That's a hard question, because we don't really think about that. So it really causes you to stop and reflect on what you're doing and what you're thinking. And so that has been helpful. And I remember just going up to some teammates and be like, hey, like, how's your heart? And they would just like, they'd break down. I said it to some pastors. Didn't do it in Germany, because there's that it's a different culture in that as well, because you just can't tell. They're very stoic people. But it was a lot of like, hey, are you good? And he's like, oh, my grandma's really sick. I'm like, okay. And then they just kind of shut up and then go play basketball. So for me, to get to know them better was just to play with them, not ask questions, not prod. They'll open up when they want to. They're very loyal people, but they're very standoffish until you break down that wall. And the way you do that is just by being with them. A lot of times when I say that I need help, it's not, I don't need someone to fix my problems. I just need someone to sit with me in them. And I think that's just been the biggest lesson that I've learned, is just like, I'm listening not to respond, I'm listening to hear. And I like, everyone just wants to be heard. And just the way to do that is just like, hey, I'm not here to fix your problems. I'm just going to sit with you. Like, are you good? How's your heart? If you're not good, like, let's just sit together. You want to cry? I'll cry too. Like, here's my shoulder. Like, let's do this together. You want to laugh? I got jokes. Like, let's do it. But if you want to just be serious, we can be serious too. And so for me, that's one of the best ways to build this bond, is just by being real and stripping away sports. Because as great as sports is, we all put on this ego, this persona, like, we're good. Especially in college, it's like, you have to be. You can't show that you're weak in any moment, because people will exploit that, or you'll lose your spot or lose playing time.
Yeah, one thing that I actually stole from my kids' little church group when they were like 5 is the teacher would stand outside, and I could not understand why they were doing this. I thought it was a waste of time, because as coaches, time is of everything. And they would check in with every little kid, ranging from like 5 to 7. And I finally said, what are you guys doing? And they're like, well, we're just checking in. And I go, for what? And they're like, you'd be amazed the things that come out from these little kids during these check-ins. And they'd have 5 questions. So they'd go through their fingers and ask these 5 different questions. And I started thinking about it, I'm like, I need to do that with my team. And so after I left college, I coached high school for a couple of years. And I thought that these high school girls were going to think this was the most ridiculous process. And about 3 days a week, we'd like line our coaches up, and you'd have to choose a coach, and they would ask you those questions. And I remember one day an athlete coming in, can we please have check-ins today? I go, yes. I go, I thought you guys were going to hate that. They're like, no, I need to talk about something. And so we all got in a line and did our check-ins. But what that allowed is them to almost, take the weight of life off their shoulders and have somebody that was connected and in life with them before they even stepped on, the field, because I always tell my kids, I go, you can't study for chemistry when you're at softball practice. You can really try, but you can't, right? And you can't argue with your roommate or get in a fight with your parents. So it was a way for them to unload and be connected to another adult, right? And so that was a huge thing that we started integrating, and it could maybe take 10 minutes of practice, which I know coaches freak out giving any free time of practice. But if you can have all your athletes in a better mind frame and kind of have things unloaded and they connected with you, that's a really great thing to start practice off with. So even if you are an athlete, you can say, hey, you know what, I'm going to bring this up with my coach. Maybe we should do this. Or even as captains, you can do that, or even in your team rooms. So everybody gets to connect, unload before they step on a court or a course or a track, whichever, so you can be performing at the best state of mind, also connecting before you even start competing.
think this is awesome. I love this. One of the things too to think about for those of us who've already graduated from college is that this is a college. The college campus is conducive to students being there for each other, because the entire support system is built to support students while they're in college, right? And then you graduate, and then you realize it's kind of like when you leave your household and you realize your mom's not going to arrange all your stuff for you anymore. Like suddenly you go, and then you're like, wait, I haven't talked to that person. Now it's been a year and we played on the same team together. And you realize you gotta do that yourself. You gotta maintain those relationships yourself and put the effort out there. And so, yeah, it's great. These are great ideas. I love this. And Chris, exactly what you're saying too, just jumping in and saying, how's your heart? And just making that connection builds a tie, builds a bond that does bring you to that place where you think about that person and you text them and you reach out to them. And yeah, that's fantastic stuff. Because the world is much bigger once you get off the college campus. Structure is not there in the same way.
I was just like typing so fast trying to like write down everything you guys just said. But that was actually kind of a perfect transition to kind of the last thing that we wanted to talk about, and kind of in the essence of vulnerability and leadership. Chris, you said, like we as athletes are so often not, encouraged to be vulnerable or to be emotional because it appears, weak, or, that you're not going to perform at your best if you are vulnerable or emotional, which I feel like we're kind of slowly getting away from, but there's still that pressure. So I think, with leadership too, it's the same deal, but how do we be vulnerable and be leaders? And how does that contribute to the dynamic of a team when you have leaders that are open and emotional and willing to sit with you?
I can hop in. Yeah, I think that's definitely a difficult thing to do. I remember specifically one moment. So my parents were going through a divorce my senior year. And so I just remember I was like in our locker room about 10 minutes before practice, just like crying, losing it. And I just was like, all right, gotta suck it up and go to practice. And we always have that just like boom, athlete face on, ready to go. And I just remember when my teammates walks in, like, dude, are you good? I'm like, no. And so just being a leader is being able to understand that like you can be weak and it won't bring your team down. Oftentimes it will lift your team up. And a lot of times, especially for me, I would always like want to be the tough guy, but that just never worked because that's not really who I am. Like I'm tough when it needs to be, but at the same time, like I'm very in tune with my emotions, and I'm like one of the more emotionally intelligent people that I know. And so for me to just pretend like I don't have them and push them aside just wasn't who I was. So for me leading that team, it was just like, I remember practice, we always had like a verse of the day. I don't remember what the verse is, but I remember just speaking in like, hey coach, like I just need to get this off my chest. Like I'm not good. Like I'm sad. I'm going through it right now, and I'm gonna give it my all because I committed to you guys, and this is what I'm like what we're doing. But like I know that I'm not gonna have the best day, and I know that things aren't gonna always be good. But if you guys just bear with me because I'm here with you and I hear y'all and I'm going to do my best, then that's going to be great. And just the response from that was so much more positive than I expected. Everyone was like, we're here for you. Like they huddled around me, like we got after it. And we just like, it was one of my best practices. And it was like people were fired up to pick each other up. It was like we all knew that we were all going through something. We just needed someone to speak up and say it. And so like as scary as it is, to be the leader means to step out into that role and be like, hey, I'm not good. And I know other people aren't either, but that's cool. We're still here and we're still going to give it our all because we committed to this, and that's who we are. Once we commit to something, we see it through. But at the end of the day, like we are human. We're not just athletes. Like our emotions are true. As much as we like to pretend that once we cross those lines for our sport, our life doesn't mean anything outside, but it's still there. It's still weighing heavy. So as long as we continue to go down that path and pretend like it's not, we're never going to go far. We won't ever enjoy the sport as much as we can. we have to be holistic in the sense of like, this sucks and it hurts, but I can bring people in with me. And then as a leader, it's like, I'm going to be the first one to make this step. No matter how big or small, I'm going to be the first one to make the step towards that unity.
I just want to build on what Chris said, and that like vulnerability is leadership. Leadership is vulnerability. And I think we've got this like very like, I'm going to go by sociology, feminist self, but the way we've viewed leadership in athletics is very like masculine. And we have like this way of we're supposed to be doing these things. And it hasn't, I mean, look how that, has it really served us? Well, probably not really. So I mean, I would think about that. And I think Chris just did a very much more eloquent way of just saying like vulnerability actually is leadership.
One of the things that I've seen, and actually one of my good friends who was an All-American golfer, she's now a mom of two. She actually was on my podcast and we were talking about this topic, but you know, I know her way more intimately than just a podcast. So, you know, but I watched her as a golfer. She sat many of hours on the white couches in my office and guiding her through being a leader at college, and now sitting across from her as a friend, and as, you know, both moms and stuff. And I listened to her story about trying to put on such a tough base, not just for winning in competition, but for the expectations of parents and all these different things that come along with being an athlete. And now she's sitting here going, she literally sat next to me and goes, I don't think I ever liked playing golf. And I just kind of looked at her and I go, that's a really big statement, my friend. Like, you spent half your life golfing. And she never was willing to let her guard down enough to really look at the things that would have brought her so much overall happiness, probably made her a better leader in different areas. And now she's having to take on these struggles in her 30s while raising children. And so much of it was, I'm not going to put my guard down, and I'm going to be a leader because that is what is expected. And as leaders, we model everything, right? As professional leaders, as parents, as whatever, we are the model. And to be honest, for all the coaches in the room, I can label myself, because I was a coach for a very long time. We often don't model that very well, because we were not raised, we were not raised in sports that way, right? And we need a model that it's okay to be vulnerable. I always questioned how much disclosure I gave to my athletes, and I way gave more than most coaches do. And it wasn't because I needed them to be my friends. I didn't want them to be my friends. I love them, but they're more my children than my friends. But I wanted them to understand that you can be a working mom and go to grad school and have chronic pain and be raising two children and still have time for yourself, or you can get through these hard things. Or I wanted them to see what is possible. I didn't want to hide it. So as an adult, I was being very vulnerable to a bunch of, young adults. But I now know, seeing them as being adults their own, that was something that I don't regret doing, because they were able to go, oh, well, my parents didn't show me that, but coach did. Right. And so I think as leaders, we are modeling stuff for other people that are following us that can help guide them into being stronger as they develop and go out into adulthood or be captains themselves. So I think that vulnerability is also just significant guidance.
Thank you. Also, I'm just like, everything you guys say, I'm just like typing as fast as I can. That is all the questions that I have for you guys. If any of the other people in here would like to ask any questions, go for it. But I just want to say a huge thank you to you three for being here and for doing this. I've learned so much, and I feel like every time I talk with any of you, I'm always just like typing down as much as I can, just letting it all soak in. So thank you so much.
Just know, anytime you talk to me, you can record it. I will not get upset. Because I'm the same way. I'm like, oh crap, I forgot what they said.
Sorry, I got kicked out there for a sec.
No, I just want to say thank you guys. That was great. And I was curious, like, how do you sometimes deal with folks who like aren't buying, maybe won't buy in right away? I mean, I think you've touched on it a little bit, but I think that's something we deal with sometimes in athletics and even in education and as a whole. If you have any tips, would love that. Obviously, it's I think a common thing. But and Carrie, I love the podcast too.
Oh, thanks. When you say buy-in, are you talking about like buying into kind of how teams do stuff, buying into, hey, mental health is a good thing for, to focus on? What do you see your kids struggling to buy? Or it could be everything.
Kind of the being vulnerable, I guess, and like feeling comfortable and being talking about mental health.
It's funny. One of the things I talk about a lot, and Jane, I apologize if you hear this from me all the time when we talk about stuff, is distress tolerance. And one of the biggest things, I would say the number one problem with humanity right now is distress tolerance. And everybody's like, no, it's not. It's this and this and this. But distress tolerance umbrella is absolutely everything. Because I was thinking, well, these are the problems. And I'm like, well, that all comes back to distress tolerance. I also think people don't take ownership for their behavior. I work with mostly kids, and I see that in parents all the time. I work with kids mostly because they'll own it more than their parents will. But why do we not communicate? Because we're afraid of what's going to happen with somebody else. Why does everybody have to be right all the time instead of having conversations? Because they don't want the distress of being wrong, right? So pretty much everything links to that. And so all these kids that come in, they're like, no, I'm going to be right, because if I'm wrong, I'm going to be in distress. I'm going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to have to admit that I'm not perfect, right? I mean, and how many perfectionist athletes are running around? 95% of them, right? Because that's how we're training, we're drilled. And I know for me, I never wanted to be embarrassed as an athlete. I was one of those hyper-focused, didn't want to be embarrassed, never, all these things. And then when I went through a lot of my medical stuff and started training at Concordia, I became very different. And now I'm like, if I make a mistake, I'm going to own it. It builds respect between the people that we're with, right? I would always ask our athletes, like in SAC or my leadership programs, I'm like, if a coach just say, whoa, dude, I just totally blew that, would you respect them more or less? And every single one goes, I'd respect them more, right? Can you imagine in the political climate we're in right now, or all the things that are going on in the world, if somebody just said, you know what? I have been looking at this totally the wrong way this whole time. People would fall on the ground. But what I have to do for myself is admit that I didn't know everything, that I was incorrect, that maybe my view was different, and that causes distress, right? I work with a lot of, chronic pain is kind of my other jam, and we do everything we can to get people out of distress and keep anxiety levels low because of nervous system and all these other components, which I could talk about for 8 years. But the thing is everybody is avoidant of so much distress, it actually causes more distress, right? And so athletes don't want to talk about it, but then their anxiety levels go up, their depression levels go up, and nobody's going to perform at a higher level when their high anxiety or or their depression levels are significant. It just doesn't, scientifically, it doesn't work that way. So, everything we do is to be comfortable. I was watching the news and somebody said, as Americans, we're addicted to comfort. I'm like, oh my gosh, they finally said it. Now, a lot of you guys are saying, I'm not comfortable when I'm running laps at freaking 6 a.m. No, that is not that, but as athletes, we handle physical discomfort better than anybody on the planet. It's the emotional discomfort, right? And I've worked with some kids that will go on to play pros, and I work with a pro athlete right now, and I'm just like, you understand we have to work through all these things for you to perform at your utmost, because I said, if you blow out on Sports Center, you're not getting drafted. Do you understand that if we don't get you comparing yourself to every other athlete under control, you won't make the cut in, all these things. So people think that we can avoid it, but it impacts our performance more than anything else. Just like we don't want to admit that we're not okay. We don't want to admit and make ourselves uncomfortable. It impacts our performance. And the Colts right now, I think I'm going to become a Colts fan just because of this, but their big focus is like helping people be okay with being vulnerable. And they say, it's okay not to be okay. And if you're a performance driven person, your performance is only going to improve by stepping in and saying, whoa, things are not okay with me. Right. And, I think athletes we are outcome focused people. We chase the W or the L or the time or the trophy. And all of us want, we all say that we're system, that we are all relational focused people in athletics. Yeah, whatever. Nick Saban doesn't make millions of dollars because he's not outcome focused, right? But the thing is, that doesn't lead to overall health. It doesn't lead to quality transitions out of sport. I always joke. I told this to Jane. I go, Jane, I met a Cal alumni. And she goes, yeah. I go, he was an Uber driver. And she goes, yeah. I go, he was 41 years old, still driving an Uber, talking about the glory days at Cal. I go, great guy, but he had never transitioned out, right? And part of me want to say, dude, call me. I'll help you transition out. But if you want to have the quality, the quality experience, the quality transition, these are conversations that have to be had. It always comes up. That's when a lot of people get into drugs after athletics, or they blow all their money, all these pro athletes, they don't know who they are without it, or they can't perform without managing the struggle that their life is leading up to be a high level performer. And that was probably way too soapboxy. So I apologize for that, but yeah.
It's good stuff.
I have to run. So I was just going to say, I wanted to answer, just kind of provide my 2 cents to what your question was. And first is you got to meet people where they're at. You can't twist people's arms into thinking things are important. But to that end, the change starts within on teams. And I know that's some of the stuff that I've been talking about with some of the teams at Linfield is the change isn't often going to come from coaches or from adults like myself. It's going to come from the athletes creating a culture where when people are ready to be met at a different place, the culture's there to where it's okay to talk. So I think this is what you guys are doing is so important, is because that's where the culture change is going to happen, is with the athletes, not necessarily with the adults. That's just kind of how it is. And just keep meeting people where they're at and creating places where it's okay to just be stoic, and it's also okay to cry before practice. And it's a virus. Once you a good kind of virus, once it happens, you create these cultures. That's where the change is going to happen.
Yeah, I definitely would second that. Meeting people where they're at is so important. And yeah, I think for me, it's because people often talk about vulnerability, and everyone thinks well, I don't want to get deep. Vulnerability has so many different levels for people. My vulnerability could be talking about something way back in my past, but someone else's vulnerability could be yeah, I failed a math class, a math test. They're all different levels. And so just telling someone hey, you don't need to tell me your entire life story, but you can just tell me that you're sad. And that's enough. That's being open, that's buying in even a little bit. And then the more they trust you, the more they'll be able to become more vulnerable. But just meeting people where they're at will allow them to be more comfortable and to build that rapport and trust within everyone.
Awesome. Thank you all.
All right. Well, unless anyone else has any questions, I think that's kind of it.
Thank you so much. I put in the chat that I don't remember if I said this at the beginning, but we record all of these. And so they're on our YouTube playlist. So we'll have that up probably by tomorrow. Feel free, obviously, to share it with anyone you want, Carrie and Chris and any athletes, anyone. Just feel free to share that, because this was excellent. Just gems. Maddie, nice job too. This is really good information for everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all this.
The other thing, if you ever need team bonding ideas, that was kind of my obsession when I was a coach. So I would say, Jane, you can give my number out. We actually started with something I sent to Jane because I'm on the board for FCA Oregon. We're how do we get these kids connected when they're always on screen? I'm let's think of fun things. So if there's ever stuff that you're hey, I just need some ideas to get around this, Jane is welcome to hand out my number. I got stalked by SAC members. I'm I don't know who these people are. When Bethany messaged me, I'm okay, you're a SAC person. You're safe. You're not a stalker. It's fine.
Yeah, I will definitely connect people to you for sure. And Chris, stay in touch too. It'd be exciting to hear how your program's going for you. And we'd love to have you come back and both of you, and Lindsay, of course. Lindsay comes back pretty regularly as a former Wildcat, but anytime you want to come back and chat with us, we'd love to have you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you
Let me
guys.
know.
Good luck. Good luck with the rest of the spring. And we hope that everybody gets to compete as much as possible in the next couple months.
Yeah, thanks. Chris,
Good one.
yep, take care.
Guys, thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.